I'm Dr. Timothy Johnson. Later on Nightline, it's a controversy about life and death. Do you keep a doomed baby alive so its organs can be used to save the lives of others?
Welcome to the Dreams of Consciousness podcast. If you'd be so kind, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hey, this is Doug from Glorious Depravity, Pyrrhon, and also Weeping Sores, and also Seputus. So,
I should mention that Doug has been on the podcast before. Back in April, I interviewed him and the other members of Pyrrhon about their new album. Welcome back, Doug.
Thanks for having me back, man. I appreciate it.
So how would you describe the music of Glorious Depravity?
I would say that Glorious Depravity is down the middle, early 90s style, East Coast US death metal.
90s US death metal with maybe a bend towards the Florida sound, right?
Yeah,
I hear a lot of Cannibal Corpse and Deicide.
Sure, yeah. I mean, like, I would say it's mostly the bands that you would associate with Morrisound at that time, as well as some stuff from up further in the northeast part of the country, and a few other stray influences too. There's a couple of sort of 90s era European death metal bands that are pretty big influences on us too. But in the spirit of regionalism, which was a big thing at that time in death metal, I kind of think of it in terms of the East Coast of the United States in the early to mid 90s.
And it should be pointed out that the name came from a Ripping Corpse song, right?
Right, exactly. So I think that kind of I mean, we chose it for a reason. You know, Ripping Corpse is from New Jersey, but they are pretty closely tied to the sort of the Florida sound of that era via the Eric Rutan connection. You know, he ended up in Morbid Angel periodically later on, but there's not like any particularly deep significance to that. I think that I'm probably the biggest Ripping Corpse fan in the band. We just thought it was a cool name, and we're not trying to overthink the aesthetic delivery in this band. It's, you know, it's not Civil War reenactment. You know, we're inspired by that era, but it's not too like super cued in on it in a deliberately recreative way.
Right. You aren't one of these like retro bands, basically.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we're, like I said, you know, numerous times now, inspired by that specific place and time. But I think that for a lot of bands who are so directly influenced by that stuff, there's a tendency to really hone the imitation down to the finest detail. And that's not really what we're trying to do. I mean, at the end of the day, we're just trying to write fun songs that are hopefully memorable and enjoyable, but it's not necessarily a piece of archiving, so to speak.
So we should talk about who is in the band. Tell me who your lineup is.
So we have on guitar, Matt Mutin, Bellis, and Woe. On other guitar, we have George Paul of Mutilation Rites and Overdose and Gravesend and a variety of other bands. On bass, we have John McKinney of Cleanteeth, and on drums, we have Chris Grigg of Woe.
So I'm familiar with most of those bands except maybe Cleanteeth, but I believe all of you guys are from the New York area. Is that right?
Yeah, well, actually, Chris and I are from the Philadelphia area originally, but we both live in New York now. And likewise, the other guys are all from other parts of the country originally. Matt and George both got their start in the Boston area. John is from North Carolina. I think that all of us played in bands in our hometowns a little bit before moving here, but I think for all of us, the bulk of our music activities have been in New York, and we're all probably more associated with New York in the popular imagination, you might say.
And did you guys meet through the scene in New York?
Yeah, I would say that, you know, primarily we know each other through the music scene, but there's also a connection sort of pattern in the band that arises from the fact that most of us, actually at this point, all of us work in software development. There is a sort of the original kernel of camaraderie in the band sort of came from the combination of those two things. When I joined the band, I was the last guy to join the band. I didn't work in that field, but almost directly as a result of having joined the band, I ended up becoming a software developer. So it was a combination of just kind of knowing each other loosely through playing live music in the metal scene in New York, and also that like sort of second layer of connection on top of it that I think brought that particular group of guys together. And it's also, I think, part of why we've been going for about 3 years now, you know, on top of many other activities in our lives. And of course now even the pandemic. So I think it's part of why we've like managed to keep it rolling and, you know, get an album out and start working on another one.
I think the software developer thing is interesting, mostly because, you know, there is this perception of metalheads, especially people who are into the very underground, extreme types of metal, to be basement-dwelling troglodytes. Except in my experience, all my friends are in some kind of field like engineering or web development or need to understand coding, you know, speak multiple languages. And so the reality versus the perception is quite stark.
Right.
The difference between the perception and the reality is quite stark.
Yeah. I would say that there are a lot of people in the metal world who have some kind of technical background for reasons that make sense. The experience of being in a DIY type of metal band is largely about solving granular problems and doing things for yourself and figuring out how to resolve various quandaries with limited resources, and that's kind of all in keeping with the kind of thought that's required to do a lot of these technical sorts of work. That being said, there's also lots of guys in metal bands who are straight up just like, basement dinguses. So it makes sense to me that there's a lot of people who are doing more technical sorts of work in the metal world, because there's, for my particular life, the same kinds of thinking have been required to accomplish both. But there's lots of ways to get into a position to play in a metal band, and there's lots of people who are in metal bands who are more in keeping with that stereotype that you're talking about of just like, a doofus who's only good at guitar or whatever. And that's also fine too. But I think that you find in a lot of more competitive living environments, like New York, obviously, is like, it's pretty tough to just pay the rent here. It requires a lot of fluid problem solving just to keep your head above water. And the case is also that in the software development world in particular, there's a lot of work right now for people who didn't necessarily specialize in that in an academic way, which I didn't do. I mean, I didn't get into it until recently, but that also means that there's, if you need to have enough, wherewithal at your disposal to buy gear and set time aside to play music, that's not going to make you any money, because obviously death metal for the most part does not make anyone any money. Then it's an attractive option in that way. And there's some other overlapping features to it. It's like a similar thing to writing music, where you're kind of iteratively investing time and effort into some project, some thing that you're refining to make it better, to eventually release to the world. It's like got a similar, internal development, external release kind of dynamic, and then it has to behave up to standards in the wild. So yeah, there's a bunch of overlap. I think there's a bunch of different factors that contribute to the number of people in the metal world who work in that kind of occupation. But I also think it's not to be mistaken for a universal thing, is there's lots of more conventional metalhead personalities still making music in this world.
I mean, I've definitely met the guys who are, well, it's a funny thing. I mean, I've definitely met the guys whose bands are all about Satan and, worshiping darkness and whatever. Funnily enough, one of the most soft-spoken, polite bands I interviewed is a Polish band who has songs like Sperm of the Antichrist. So it is a kind of weird yin-yang between like what the music sounds like and what the actual people are like. But, in terms of metal, I mean, even, if we're talking about that 90s era of death metal, there was an extremely high bar to be able to play music like Cannibal Corpse or Suffocation. Do you know what I mean? Like it was music that you really had to dedicate yourself to. And so to me, it's not a stretch that the same kind of person who would, as you say, granular problem solving, but, even in the Malcolm Gladwell sense of dedicating 20 or 10,000 hours to a craft in order to become an expert at it, that really is the case with most extreme metal. Like you don't pick up a guitar and then just bash out a bunch of chords and end up with a death metal album the next day.
Yeah, that's definitely true, that it requires a lot of discipline just to be able to make those sorts of sounds. And to some extent, there's some commonality between a lot of technical professionals and a metal guitarist. And this, like, this is so pretentious. This like Flaubert way, he had this line about being regular and orderly in your life so that you can be wild and original in your work, or something along those lines. But I think it also is worth noting that the OG crop of 80s and 90s death metal guys in the United States, like the guys who wrote the material that we derive our sound from, are also pretty down the middle what you'd expect a metal musician to be like personalities. Glenn Benton isn't some mild mannered, software engineer by day, and then he's Glenn Benton at night. No, he's just fucking Glenn Benton all the time, And I think that the ability to sort of live a double life like that is something that's newer in the metal world. I think that there are a bunch of factors that coalesced to make that a possibility. The fact that it's so cheap to record music, I think, is probably the biggest one with contemporary recording technology. The ability to make music on a laptop with some microphones on your own time. And that's in fact how we made the Glorious Depravity record. Chris, our drummer, is the one who recorded it and mixed it. And while he's got, a pretty impressive outfit of recording gear, we still ultimately just made the album on a laptop in our practice space with, some mics and preamps and such plugged into it. And he mixed it, sitting on his couch at home while taking care of his daughter, So I think that kind of fit has made more space in the metal world for people who have a lot of discipline and focus, but also know that they can't really ever make a living doing it, to make albums that are in like a pretty technically demanding idiom like death metal. So I think that, when I think about it, most of my creative output in any band, Pyrrhon or Glorious Depravity or Weeping Sores, which Chris also recorded incidentally, or Sabidus, which Steve recorded, all of those projects probably wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the newfangled lack of reliance on record labels to pay for a studio budget and stuff. The fact that you can just do it in this very, very DIY way, but still have like a fleshed out sounding final product rather. And that's why I don't have to be Glenn Benton all the time.
How do you describe the nature of Glorious Depravity as a band? I mean, we talked about all the other bands you guys are involved with. Is Glorious Depravity considered a side project? Is this a one-off recording that you guys did? Or will this be an ongoing band that you guys plan on recording more albums for?
We're planning to keep going. We've already started writing for another record of some description, whether it's an EP or an LP is a little up in the air. It's probably going to be an LP, but the nature of the band, I think, is that it's just a regular band. We're all members of it. We play together. It's a collaborative experience like any other band. I wouldn't say that we've all agreed that it's a side project or anything like that. And in some ways, compared to some of our other projects that don't play live, it's like more of a real band than a lot of the ones that predate it. But I think that to some degree, your longest running band that plays live is always going to be your main project in some way. So I wouldn't characterize Glorious Depravity as a side project. I frankly still think of Pyrrhon as being my main band, but that's only because Pyrrhon has been continuously active for longer than any other band that I'm in. So I can't speak to what the other guys would say about this. I think it probably differs from person to person. I think that Chris and I are probably the only two people who are really super active in their long-running bands right now. Everyone else is in some kind of hibernation for that, as far as that kind of stuff goes, I think. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I try to think of it in those terms. It's just, a creative project that I'm excited about, that I like to put my energy into and spend time with the guys who are in it. So it's definitely like on the spectrum of fun to serious bands, it's like a fun band. That's more the way that I think about it.
So you mentioned that you were the last member to join. How did the band initially get together?
So this is all kind of reconstructed from what the other guys have told me. The original iteration of the band was just Chris and Matt, who were already playing together in Woe at the time. They wanted to do a more originally it was more of a Black and Death kind of thing with just the two of them, where Chris was playing drums, which he hasn't done that in any bands for some time prior to Glorious Depravity. And they recorded a demo in that formation under the name Death Icon, which was the original name when I joined the project still. I think that I can't remember whether whether John or George joined first after Chris and Matt's initial iteration of the band. But basically, George and John both got brought in due to a combination of familiarity through live music, and again, the software developer overlap was something that they all realized they had in common pretty early on. So they all kind of bonded over that. And so basically, those four got together once they realized that they being Matt and Chris wanted to do a more fleshed out band with two guitars and a separate bass player that could play live. And then I guess Chris asked me to join or to come in and try out effectively as a vocalist. I don't know a whole lot about the line of reasoning that led to wanting a separate singer. I've learned since I joined the band that I enjoy doing vocals more than any other member, so that makes sense. And I imagine that given that the band was going into more technical and noodly direction, the other guys realized that they didn't want to be dealing with doing vocals at the same time as playing a bunch of complicated guitar parts. So they figured they should bring somebody in. And I primarily knew Chris prior to joining the band, and we had kind of talked about doing some kind of project a couple times on and off in the years prior to my joining, but we never, we're both like busy guys. We both failed to really do anything about it. So I mostly joined because I was like, oh, well, we've been talking about doing this, and this lineup of guys sounds impressive. And I would like to do a more straight ahead and intuitive kind of death metal band. So that's when I came aboard, and the rest is history, as they say.
So do you know what led them to transform from this blackened death metal style that they started off with to the more classical American death metal sound?
I think that part of the process was the fact that I joined and kind of kept requesting more stuff along those lines. I think that they realized they wanted to get away from black metal and go in a more death metal oriented direction. Before I was in the band, they just kind of were like, well, we're already in another black metal band, and one of those is enough for now, I guess. I don't know exactly what the origin of that choice was, but that's the impression that I've gotten, is they kind of were like, well, we'd rather play something different. And so and also I think they wanted to have like a more dynamic, like, more fleshed out full band. And so maybe the other two guys joining also kind of inclined them in a more death metal oriented direction that, is more contingent upon having two guitars instead of just one, and so forth. But yeah, I don't know. It all happened pretty organically. I don't think there was no like band meeting where we're like, do East Coast Florida death metal. It was just like, a bunch of consecutive small decisions about what kinds of riffs we wanted to write. We write all the music in the room as a full band. Like, we just come up with the riffs and kind of collectively arrange them on the spot. So I guess that was just kind of what was on our minds when we started composing most of the songs for this record. It was the center of gravity between us musically, maybe, the thing that we all had the most in common and the most like collective affection for. I don't know. There really wasn't a plan. It kind of just happened.
So in 2018, you released Hospital Incinerator Blues as a single. Was that the first song that you guys completed?
No. The first song we wrote was actually the Stonehammer Swings, which is also on Ageless Violence, our debut album, along with Hospital Incinerator Blues. We actually, so there's that Bandcamp single of the Hospital Incinerator Blues demo version, but the session that produced that actually was a 4-song demo that we kind of made originally just for internal use, but we decided that we wanted to have something publicly available so that we could get shows and stuff. So we just put that one on Bandcamp. The other 3 songs that were on that demo, 2 of them are on Ageless Violence. There's Stonehammer, like I said, and there's Ocean of Scabs. The opening song there's a demo version of that from that demo. And then there's a 4th song that never made it onto the album, but that we kind of partially cannibalized to make one of the songs on the LP. And that one is kind of just, lost to the sands of time, I guess. I don't know. We might release that in the future as some kind of bonus material in the way the bands do once in a while. But yeah, I wouldn't say that Hospital Incinerator Blues recording was meant to be considered like a real proper demo release. It's just something that we threw up on the internet so that we could prove to promoters and such that we exist.
Prove to people that you guys were in fact a real band, because there are a lot of bands, and some of them never practice or write any songs, and just kind of get together talking about how cool it would be if they sounded a certain way.
Right. Yeah. I would say that we were interested in playing shows. That was a big impetus for the band, was just to play in live settings where, the music was relatively low stakes and just about having fun and not like some kind of fraught, emotionally vulnerable experience in the way that a lot of our other bands can be. So in order to do that, you have to have a proof of concept that's available for promoters so they know what you sound like and have a sense of who you'd fit with and so on and so forth. So we made those demos, I think, just in order to also see how recording in our space would go, but also in order to just have something that we could show to various bookers in order to get onto bills. I think that like if we had just gone around verbally telling people that like, hey, we have this like, we have like a kind of old school sounding death metal band, and it's these guys from bands that you maybe have heard of, and will you book us? That probably would have worked okay, but it's just a lot easier and less awkward, to say, hey, listen to this track. Like, what shows do you have coming up? So it was almost just pure expedience. And then we were going to keep it internally or just like send it around to people we were hoping to, be booked by and such. But then we just kind of got excited about it and decided to put one of the songs online so that we could, link it to our friends who aren't doing industry things.
So let's talk about Ageless Violence. It came out on November 27th of this year, and it was released by Translation Loss. So from the 4-song demo to the release of the album, how long had you guys been working on it?
We put it together, I guess, start to finish and compositionally speaking, in about a year. I would say that we started writing in earnest in the summer of 2018, which is like kind of right away when the band formed. We're like, we're going to write some songs, because like what else is there to do at first when you have no catalog? We recorded the demo in late summer, early fall of 2018, and then we recorded the album in the fall of 2019. So yeah, it was about a year. There's about a year of writing and then like a month or two of just rehearsing it, trying to get it tight. But because we were recording it ourselves, we were able to do it in pretty piecemeal fashion. There wasn't the scenario where you have to like get it perfect and then go into the studio and, do it as fast as possible to save money. We were able to, spread it out over a few weeks. So it wasn't quite as nerve-wracking as it can be when you're working in someone else's studio and incurring hourly costs.
So you mentioned Chris Grigg from Woe recorded this. Of course, Chris Grigg has had years of experience with self-recording. Was he always the natural choice to record the album?
Yeah, he was always pretty excited about doing it. Chris had taken a break from recording music for a while prior to Glorious Depravity getting together. He just, was busy with other aspects of his life and didn't put any time into it for a little stretch of a couple of years there. And then once Glorious Depravity got going, there's, John, bassist, is also enthusiastic about recording and recording technology. And we had a nice practice space in which we could make recordings that sound pretty good with the right kind of gear and the right mixing talent. And I think the combination of factors and the fact that there's a new band to put energy into kind of got him back into it. So yeah, we never really talked about having anyone else do it. I wouldn't say that it's guaranteed that we're always going to record in our practice space with Chris doing the recording, because I think that for anyone who has been in a band where one of the members is recording the album, and I've been in a few of these at this point, it's just a lot of cognitive load for one person to be worried about their own performance and their takes and their parts and everything, and also be thinking about the bigger picture of the final recorded product. That's just a lot to deal with. So it's possible that, we'll just decide to pay someone to do it at some point. It's not like it's not like some feature of the band that it has to be Chris, but he did a fucking amazing job with it. I think the album sounds incredible. And obviously it took a lot of stress off of us being the rest of us. It put a lot of stress on Chris to have to do it. It took a lot of stress off the rest of us to not have to go and, schedule formalized recording sessions in some studio somewhere. So it was a mix of very convenient for some of us and a lot more work for other of us, but the final result was great. And I think it's pretty likely that the next one will also be recorded by Chris. We haven't really talked about it yet, but we're just, we feel like we've had success with the formula that we have. And for this kind of band especially, it makes sense to go back well if it's working.
Yeah, the album does sound great. I grew up on the era of death metal that you described, and those albums never sounded this good. I mean, all due respect to Scott Burnt and Tom Morris and everyone else, but this is a quantum leap above what I used to buy and listen to in the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what you think of as sounding good. That's very subjective property. I think that it's definitely, in the technical sense, a superior product to those albums, which are mostly done in a very kludgy fashion. Like the Morrisound recordings are all incredibly idiosyncratic because of all the weird stuff they had to do to make what sounds like a death metal record in the pre-digital era. Effectively, there are some good stories from Morrisound of Scott Burns doing things like programming sound replaced kicks by calculating the number of microseconds between each kick hit in a double bass part, because there wasn't any grid that you could snap to. There wasn't a fancy contemporary Pro Tools implementation that you could use to just automate that. You had to just tell the DAW how far apart the kick hits were in some easily recognized to a computer language. So I would say that our album definitely sounds a lot bigger and better than those classic death metal records did. But the way in which those albums are made also just gives them an incredible amount of personality. And while I think that the recording for Ageless sound incredible, and actually itself also has a lot of personality, I'm not so quick to diminish the way that those old records sound, because I think they all have really unique sonic footprints, and to some degree they're the yardstick for all the death metal that has occurred since. Every version of mixing death metal is a reaction to that stuff in some way. So what is good and what is bad in a case like this, to me, those albums sound fucking amazing, even though they are very primitive and kludgy in their way. That is part of it's part of the atmosphere. You could tell that they were doing something new because it hadn't been refined to this perfect sheen. It was still being made up on the spot, how to implement it, and that to me is cool and irreplaceable feature of those albums. You can't even aspire to doing that now, because death metal of course has been used and reused constantly for 25 years since even the last of those albums came out. So it's something that I think about when I think about why those albums are so good, but it's not something that we can do because that time is just over. You can't do it anymore.
I'm curious, as the vocalist, did you change your approach at all for this band? Is there a difference between the way you approach vocals in, let's say, Pyrrhon versus the way you do in Glorious Depravity?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I would say that in general, when I approach an album by a given project, I try to bring an energy that is specific to that project, whether that impacts my selection of techniques or whatever or not. In the case of Pyrrhon versus Glorious Depravity, like definitely it's completely different stylistic register for me to be singing in. I mean, there's a lot of the same stuff, there's low growls and high screams like there are in Pyrrhon, but in Pyrrhon there's all kinds of other different sort of less conventionally death metal-ish registers going on, and lots of effects and looping and, all kinds of bells and whistles. Whereas for Glorious Depravity, it's really just straight up the most basic death metal techniques that are available. There's a low vocal, there's a high vocal. I sing the low vocal most of the time. The high is more of an accent. I like to do sort of a Cannibal Corpse-ish, like spit out lots of syllables in a rapid scream rapping like fashion, I guess. In Glorious Depravity, it's something that Corpse Grinder is always doing, or, occasionally you'll get Dave Vincent doing it, or Jeff Walker, one of those kinds of guys. I guess in Exhumed, there's a lot of this. In the 90s Exhumed stuff, they're always just like, trying to do 16th notes on the vocals, and trade off that way. Yeah, it's a lot more straight ahead. I'm not trying to be as fancy and sophisticated, I guess you might say, as I am in Pyrrhon. There's not as much code switching. It's just, straight up, I'm doing a death metal voice.
And lyrically, it seems like you took more of a gore kind of tack on this one.
Yeah, it's kind of the same filter applied to the delivery as to the lyrics. I would say that, fundamentally, like my preoccupations as a lyricist are the same. Mostly someone being mad about how shitty everything is, but I have a ton of affection and for the sort of weird, grandiloquent way that a lot of conventional death metal lyrics are written. There's like this over the top, like sort of comic book like voice that you see in a lot of the classic death metal lyrics. And I kind of like shoved my general lyrical perspective through the filter of just like the way that those lyrics are written, sort of a lot of little weird idiosyncrasies of what you would see from the classic, Morbid Angel and Cannibal Corpse and Suffocation records and such. And mostly I just tried to have fun with it. I just tried to entertain myself. It's like, again, like the overall tenor of the band is not especially serious or dour. We're kind of laughing past the graveyard, you might say. So that definitely informed my lyrical choices. I was trying to make myself and my bandmates laugh a lot of the time. So there's not like a lot of deep philosophy going on there. I mean, my personality comes through, but mostly it's just an effort to project the same kind of like Undertaker from WWF style energy as you get from a lot of the classic death metal.
That is a good point. I feel like a lot of the extremity from death metal lyrics really does come down to bands wanting to amuse and entertain themselves. We were talking about the basement dwelling troglodyte kind of perception that there is of metalheads, but I think a lot of it is just people wanting to have fun doing or writing about the most outrageous things that they can think of.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's been a part of every fun musical experience I've ever had has had an element of the people involved trying to entertain each other as well as entertaining the audience. I'm sure that this varies a lot from band to band, but for me at least, I really value and cherish the collaborative side of making music. It's one of the reasons I think I've had success being primarily just a vocalist, even though I can play instruments. When you're just doing vocals, you're reliant on all of your other bandmates, because in a metal context, like the vocals are kind of mostly the icing on the cake, not really the cake itself. So to me, like a big part of the appeal of making music is like this, the sort of camaraderie you have with the guys you're working with, and sort of being able to like push each other and, get the craziest stuff out of each other within bands, there's just the basic tenor of conversation usually is pretty jokey. It's pretty like silly, I would say. No matter how serious the band is, you'll find that all bands have in jokes and, weird personality tics that they all kind of laugh at with each other. And I find that I really like to embrace that side of making music, and it creeps into my like creative behavior as well, because I think about, what would get a good reaction out of the people I'm in the band with. And that's, just part of the collaborative process to me.
How did Translation Loss get involved with the release? When did they come on board?
Well, we contacted them initially in early mid 2020. The album was completed in terms of mastering and such in the beginning part of the year, and we started to shop it around. Both Chris and I were already personally familiar with Drew from Translation Loss, who lives in the Philadelphia area and also works for Relapse Records, which Pyrrhon had worked with in the past. And we were collectively big fans of the label already, so we got in touch with them about potentially releasing it. They were interested, and this was all in February and March, and then COVID happened, and as you can imagine, just like kind of everything went in the back burner for everybody. So we kind of like all spent a few months just trying to figure out how to live under these circumstances, and then kind of reconvened over the summer to talk again about a release plan for the record. And at that time we really got the ball rolling more seriously. So yeah, I guess like the TLDR is that like we, Chris and I had known Drew for a while and just liked the label. And so we, contacted them, and fortunately they were receptive to the idea.
So was the delay of the release mostly due to manufacturing concerns?
I think that it's more that none of us had the psychological bandwidth to really keep the process moving. It was just an incredibly disruptive time, you know. Obviously, the Pyrrhon album came out in January, or not January, I'm sorry, in June. And that only happened because most of like the grunt work to get the release to occur happened before things got really bad with COVID. Whereas in the case of the Glorious Depravity record, when the COVID situation got really serious, we were kind of just in the very beginning phases of talking to Drew about Translation Lots releasing the. So we all kind of just like backburnered it, you know, for a while as we all figured out how to deal with day-to-day life under this completely new and unfamiliar set of circumstances. So I don't know. I mean, like there wasn't like some conscious decision to be like, oh, we're worried about like releasing this because of manufacturing, so we have to wait. It's more just like we're just starting to talk about it, and like, you know, there's no formal arrangement. And then this happened and we're like, oh, let's just put this on pause for a bit while we all figure out like what this means for our lives. And then, like, you know, again, all of us being busy people, you know, we just didn't come back to it for a while.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, back in March, April, May, it wasn't even really it wasn't clear how long this was going to last. And just in terms of the way the pandemic unfolded, it really did seem like, well, I'm not sure if I'm going to be alive in 6 months or not.
Right, exactly. And that's the thing. It's like we weren't clear on when being a band in any way was going to be possible again for months and months after the first, you know, round of shutdowns went into place. So it just seemed like given again, like the relatively, you know, lighthearted and like, you know, I don't know, like jocular nature of the band, it just didn't seem like a super high priority to like, you know, we got to get this record out right now. Like the world needs to hear this silly death metal record now. You know, that wasn't really the attitude. We're all just like, okay, hold on a second. You know, let's find out how we're going to get groceries for the next few months. And then we can come back to the consideration of how to release the silly death metal record. You know, like it's not the kind of album that I think, you know, goes stale if it sits around for a few months. So yeah, I don't know. It's just like it wasn't front of mind for anybody. It's hard. There's a big logistical push that's required to release an underground death metal record from everyone who's involved, and it just like didn't come together for a bit.
Yeah, and especially living in New York, as you guys were dealing with one of the most intense COVID situations, I think, of any city. I don't remember if it was you or one of your bandmates, but somebody shared a photo of a refrigerated truck filled with corpses because these people had died from the virus, but there were no spaces available for them to be buried or, you know, to even have funerals or anything like that.
Yeah, that was me. And, you know, it's sad to say it, but we're headed back in that direction right now. The COVID situation here is getting really, really bad again. And ICU beds are starting to run out. And, you know, it's cold as hell outside right now. Like I said, there was a snowstorm the past 24 hours. So it's not likely that people are going to be very good about staying outside and keeping their distance. And obviously there's a lot of shitty mixed messaging coming from our government about what the acceptable types of behavior are. So we're about to see the same thing again that we saw in March and April and May here. It's pretty fucking infuriating, honestly, that we seem to have learned absolutely nothing from totally eating shit on this issue just 6 months ago. But here we are.
Well, thoughts and prayers, as they say, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, right. I mean, not to be a downer. Anyway, listen to our record. It's really cool. It'll make you laugh, and it's got good riffs.
I mean, refrigerated truck full of corpses does sound like a Cannibal Corpse album.
Yeah, it's pretty on point. I mean, like, you know, brutality may be funny, but it's also real. You know, like to some degree, the question often is it better to laugh or to cry? and I try to laugh as much as I can.
So on that note, Ageless Violence is the name of the first Glorious Depravity album, and it's out now through Translation Lost Records.
Yes.
Doug, tell people how they can order the album.
So you can purchase the album digitally on CD or on cassette through our Bandcamp. That's gloriousdepravity.bandcamp.com. I believe the Translation Lost still has some copies of the vinyl version of the record left on 2 beautiful pressings, and you can get that through their website. You can also follow the band on Instagram at /Glorious Depravity, on Facebook at /Glorious Depravity, on Twitter at Ocean of Scabs. And we are available, I think, on like basically every streaming service. You want Spotify, Apple Music, all of them. I don't stream. I'm too old school for that. So I can't think of any others. We're on Tidal. I know that. So just look it up. Just check it out. It's probably there.
If all else fails, there's always YouTube, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Just give us nothing. I mean, it doesn't matter. Spotify, we're going to see like 150th of a cent. So it's fine.
You did say you guys had written some more material. Do you guys have a plan on when you want to release that?
We are hoping to get it done by late 2021. When it will come out, I cannot say, because it's always a crapshoot as to how long it takes from cutting the final recording to actually getting it out the door goes. But yeah, you can look forward to Glorious Depravity 2 sometime in the next 18 months, I would say.
Is there anything else you want to say?
Well, thanks again. And I would say stay safe. Stay safe-ish. Not too safe. And yeah, buy our fucking album, man. We can't play any shows, so it'd be great to have some cash.
Have you guys looked into, I know a couple bands are doing this, and I don't really know the economics of it, but I've seen a couple of like live in studio kind of screener sessions where people pay essentially the way they would pay for like a pay-per-view or something like that. Have you guys looked into that?
Yeah, we actually have, and we were actually planning on doing one, and then COVID started getting really, really bad around here again, and we decided it was better to wait. So that might occur in the future because we have a good in for one of those. But we're going to wait until it's a little bit less of a maybe you will die of a horrible disease situation. So we're working on it. Just waiting to be able to create the brutality without choking and dying.
Doing this podcast and speaking to people from around the world, it has been, and especially my own experiences here in Malaysia, where they shut down the borders and no one's allowed in or out. And so for the most part, we're dealing with like a closed environment in terms of the virus. Like there have been very few outbreaks, relatively speaking. But there has been this whiplash between speaking with, people like yourself who live in New York, who are dealing with maybe the worst possible situation as far as the pandemic goes, and people in Sweden who are like, yeah, the government really didn't put any restrictions on us, and we didn't really do anything different this year in terms of releasing our album. It's kind of mind-boggling that we're all living through the same thing, and yet not really living through the same thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that the Swedish experience is actually probably more similar to the American experience than they might have made it out to be in the past. I actually just saw a news item today about how the King of Sweden was expressing regret that they had gotten it so horribly wrong and so many of their citizens had died. But yeah, it's definitely, I think in a way, the COVID pandemic has made the world seem both bigger and smaller at the same time, because on one hand, everyone is dealing with the same thing all at once in this way where everyone's lives are changing in at the same time in a unified way. And that's really uncommon, right? Like, the world is huge, and it's really unusual for a single event to affect everybody to some degree. But on the other hand, it's really like, as you were kind of suggesting, highlighted a lot of the granular regional differences between one place and the next, and like the impact that the unifying event has been so refracted by like the prism of the society in which it occurs, that it really highlights how different things can be from place to place, and how much of an effect the policy can have on the way something like this changes the lives of individual members of the citizenry. That's all a little highfalutin. Anyway, I hope it's over soon so we can play some fucking shows, for God's sake.
No more refrigerated trucks.
No, I'm tired of them.
Anyways, thank you so much, Doug.
Hey, Adrian, thanks again, man. I really appreciate you having me back, and it's really a pleasure to talk to you.
Cool. Stay safe, everyone.
The